Hei, hei. Da ønsker jeg velkommen til dette første søndagsforedraget vårt her på HL-senteret denne høsten. Foredraget vil bli holdt på engelsk, fordi vi har vært så heldige å få en foredragsholder fra Romania, Petre Matei. He is a researcher at the Elie Wiesel National Institute for the Study of the Holocaust in Romania. He holds a PhD in history from the University of Bucharest, and he's also been a DAAD fellow at the Ruhr University in Bochum and a fellow at the US Holocaust Memorial Museum in Washington. Matei published over 20 journal articles and collections of essays on various aspects of the Romani history, including the deportation of Romanian Roma to Transnistria in 1942-43. Og det jo delvis også hans tema I kveld. That's his topic here today. I would give the floor to you, Petre, and we'll have your lecture, and then I think we can open for some questions from the audience afterwards. Okay.
Thank you very much. I'd like to thank the organizer, but also to you for coming here. I must say that I participated a few days ago also in a conference organized here, and I was afraid, not only by the people, participating, whose English was definitely better than mine, but I was afraid also by the people on the street, the Norwegians speaking so much better English. That was a bit scary. So I decided, which doesn't to me, usually I prefer to speak freely or to have a PowerPoint presentation. I decided for the first time to read. But on the other hand, right now, I'm a bit anxious because I realize, however, that maybe it's good to have a PowerPoint presentation, but also to read. So it's up to you. So in the end, I think I will do this simultaneously somehow. I will read. And I will also make available to you a PowerPoint presentation. There isn't a perfect overlapping between those two things, but I think the advantage would be that you will have some more information. You could focus on some questions which I may not discuss, and you will find more interesting than what I have to say. So if it's okay with you, let's proceed. Is it okay? I hear no, so that means, anyway. So, the title of my presentation, as you see, is Roma deportations to Transnistria during the Second World War, between central decision-making and local initiatives. So I won't talk actually that much about what happened during the war. I will talk more about what had happened before the war and contributed to the Roma deportations. I won't talk about it in a very descriptive manner. On that day it happened this, and then Antonescu, the Romanian dictator, decided something else. It had that impact and so on. I would instead problematize a bit, because if I were to talk about what happened, let's say in Transnistria, where we know the facts. The basic facts are as follows. 25,000 Roma were deported by the Romanian authorities in 1942 to Transnistria, where within 2 years, about half of them died. And according to the Romanian definition of the Holocaust, not only Jews, and we are talking about hundreds of thousands of Jews being deported to Transnistria as well, or to Auschwitz, from northwestern Transylvania, where, we are talking about a huge number of casualties, but we also talk about this Roma. So what I want to talk basically, and what I find quite interesting, is how it came that a sovereign state like Romania. So Romania, unlike Norway, was not occupied by Nazi Germany. It's not easy for us because we can't, accuse the Germans. It has to do with us. So how it came that Romania deported so many Jews and so many Roma? My presentation is about Roma, and we'll talk about Roma. And the second question is how it came that actually there were such huge differences in the way the Roma were treated in Romania in this period. Because we have huge disparities, huge differences. And I give you a few examples. My own hometown. Do you know these autos, Dacia? Do you? No. You have Tesla. So Dacia is a French-Romanian rather cheap car, which is produced in Romania, in Pitești, in my hometown, which is like, has like 200,000 inhabitants. During the war, it had 25,000 inhabitants. And this city, this town, deported 1,007 Roma. Not more, not less. But Bucharest, which had like 1 million inhabitants, deported less than a small city like mine. Or in the same district, we had other cities having more or less the same, overall population, with more or less the same percentage of Roma share within the population, and these cities deported nobody, or maybe 2 persons or 3 persons. So the second question, as I said, is how it came to such differences. Why? Because it's easy, and as I say, we don't really have this advantage of having had the Germans to accuse of everything, and this is a problem. So we have to dig a bit deeper. So having the Germans is beautiful. It helps us to make use of some meta-narrative, to explain everything. And this is quite a temptation. I mean, the Germans are always guilty of everything, And what if we don't make use of this narrative and go a little deeper in order to try to understand these differences with regard to the treatment suffered by the Roma? I hope I didn't lose you. So, and to avoid losing you, I will present already the conclusion of my presentation, but I will present it as a working hypothesis. So I will try to prove what I'm going to say right now. So my hypothesis is that these deportations were neither the result of German pressure or of some recent evolutions as eugenics influence on the Romanian government, but the consequence of a long-term exclusion by local actors. So what I'm going to talk about is, first of all, criminalization of Roma, which is a very long process. And it doesn't really have to do only with Romania. It happens everywhere. Whenever you have a state, whenever you have institutions, whenever you have law enforcement agencies, you have people who get to be suspected from this perspective. But these criminalization of Roma, ethnic criminalization, by the Romanian police was aggravated by some recent evolutions, such as the disappearance of traditional Roma crafts and services, increased poverty in Romania, affecting Roma, accelerated sedentarization of formerly nomadic Roma. And these developments frustrated the local authorities, which then played a considerable influence on Antonescu's decision to deport the Roma. Antonescu was the Romanian dictator, like Kissling here, it was back then in Romania. And secondly, once Antonescu gave this order to deport the Roma, those criteria invoked, who is the dangerous gypsy, for example, were interpreted and used by the local authorities according to their own agendas. Okay, so I will try to okay, let's put it this way. When you came here, what did you expect me to tell you? Okay, maybe I will try to maybe not you, but others expect to find some juicy stories about Romanian Rasenigenică, so racial hygiene specialists, just like in Germany, just like Robert Ritter and others, these discussions about eugenics and Rasenhygiene and so on. And these discussions, and not only discussions, but some expect to have, to have that in 1930s in Romania as well. I mean, and we had that. We had, intellectuals who had been educated in Germany in the 1930s, who had their PhD defended at, top German universities and so on, coming back with Nazi ideas. We did have that. But we didn't have this interaction, this interplay between authorities and intellectuals. Yeah? So we don't really have this. So I don't think we have that German racial similar to Germany. There are some problems with this simplistic overview. Attempts to understand the treatment, the persecution of the Roma during the war. And it's quite easy and tempting because it's juicy. And at the end of the day, everybody just wants, to know who are the good guys and who are the bad guys. Yeah? And the good guys in this case are the victims, and the bad guys are those we are taught to identify because we deal a lot with this German model. I mean, Rassenigenikeer. Yeah? Then another problem is that with the so-called idea that the nationalism, here, the Romanian nationalism, must have been obsessed with the Roma, just as it is nowadays. In Romania nowadays, Roma are the most hated ethnic group. Yeah? More than the Jews, more than Hungarians, and Roma are now the significant other, to the Romanian nationalists. But in inter-Romania, the significant other were not the Roma, but the Jews. So nationalism, doesn't, appear all of a sudden and, targets everybody without any attempt to distinguish between. Roma were actually at the end of this spectrum of, sensitivities regarding the others, And of course you hate the others, and Romanians in this case, according to some interests, some fears. For example, you hate especially those who are just too many, or you think that there are too many others. You hate or you are afraid of those who are better educated than you are, who are more competitive economically, socially, who live in the cities, who are influential or seen as being influential. You are afraid and you learn to hate those who live in enclaves, eventually close to the borders. So you have a state, I know the situation here, but I'm still giving us an example, Romania. So you have Romania and other nations like Hungary. After the First World War, Romania incorporated Transylvania as well. But you still had like 1 million Hungarians. Now, these Hungarians, of course, were seen as irredentist, as dangerous for the Romanian state because they felt more as Hungarian as Romanians and so on. And the fear was that these Hungarians would try to undermine the Romanian state. The same happened to the Ukrainians. The same happened to the Bulgarians. Jews play a different role here because they were seen as too many, as too well-educated, and so on, and moreover were seen as being Hungarianized or Russian-like, and so on. Where are the Roma here? In this, if we were to try to present the role of the Roma from this perspective of deportations, did they fulfill these conditions of being seen as dangerous? No. I would say, because the Roma were only the 8th largest ethnic group in Romania. So, we had, according to the Romanian census in 1930, 260,000 Roma who declared themselves as Roma. For Norway, this must be a huge number. But most likely there were double so many Roma in Romania back then, because there is this temptation or tendency among Roma not to declare themselves as such. But what I want to say is Roma didn't correspond to these fears of the Romanians back then. Only the 8th largest ethnic group, after Hungarians, 8%, Germans, 4%, Jews, 4%, Russians, Bulgarians, Ukrainians, Bulgarians, I think I mentioned them already. So you have the Roma quite low, yeah, in this hierarchy. Did they, were they economically competitive, seen as dangerous? Again, no. Yeah, so it's a huge difference between Jews and Roma from this perspective. Did Roma live in the cities as it happened according to these Romanian sensitivities? Yeah, did they live in the cities? I mean, were they competitive against social, economically, cultural, and so on? Again, no. The answer is no. So Roma didn't correspond to this definition of who is to be seen as a danger. So on one hand, I'm trying, to deal a bit with these expectations we have when we are talking about persecution during the war. Yeah. So Rassenigene, and I try to. And I can prove again that it's not the case. Yeah? Although we had some people, as I said, educated in Germany, who said, as well, like in Germany, we should have the gypsies sterilized. We should have them, they shouldn't be allowed to marry Romanian women, or Romanians as well. Did we have that? Yes, we did have that. Are they similar to what happened in Nazi Germany? Absolutely. Yeah? But the problem is, it didn't happen this way. I mean, during the war, in 1942, when they were deported, these definitions of eugenicists, of the Romanian eugenicists, as to who is dangerous, from this perspective, the Roma who should have been deported first of all, according to the eugenicists, should have been those who were integrated, yeah? Who were rich enough to be able to marry Romanians and so on. To endanger the Romanian blood. But it didn't happen like this. So those who were deported, first of all, were those who were actually nomadic Roma and were seen as endogamous groups. As people who anyway don't marry people from other groups. Yeah? So it doesn't fit. Yeah? So, again, talking about nationalism, no, Roma were not seen as a danger from this perspective. And as an example, I could invoke two situations. I don't know if you know something about this Roma emancipation movement from the 1930s. There are some interesting books, huge books, like each of them having 1,000 pages in English, available, produced, edited by some historians at St. Andrews University in Scotland. And they are really wonderful books talking about this movement, about these personalities and so on. And the Roma movement in Romania was quite important. And you had already a Roma Congress in Romania, in Bucharest, in October 1933. And what is interesting is here that on the 8th of October, when this Congress took place, among others, who was elected as member of honor of this Roma organization, Corneliu Zelea Codreanu. That name might not tell you much, but he was the leader of the fascist students' organization in Romania. And in 1937, you have some political agreement between the most important Roma personalities and the National Christian Party, which was again a party belonging to the far right, which otherwise in 1937 got to the power, had the power, formed the government, and introduced the first anti-Semitic laws in Romania. So, on one hand, we have some expectations. On the other hand, we have the reality, which does contradict our own expectations we might have regarding the Roma deportations, yeah? And the Roma treatment. So, I would say, again, Romanian nationalism, inter nationalism, was not obsessed with the Roma, as it is the case nowadays. Yeah? There were intellectuals who were, influenced by this Rassenigene in Germany as well, and they definitely hated the gypsies. But I would doubt that they had the power and the influence to make the government, to act according to their own fears. Yeah? So I will try to skip a bit. So this is a map of Romania during the war. I don't know. So does it work like this? So this is my my hometown here. This is Transnistria, where Roma were deported to starting with 1942. Transnistria was the same place where also Jews were deported. Roma were deported in these 4 districts, the settled Roma especially here and the nomadic Roma over there. And the western part of Transnistria was also used, had already been used in 1941 to deport the Jews. Yeah? As a tentative conclusion, I would say that it is difficult to understand the particularities of deporting Roma from Romania with borrowed narratives, focusing on the anti-Gypsyism of Romanian nationalism, the alleged influence of eugenics, and there is another theory that during the war some population exchanges must have had place, and I would also criticize this theory a bit because it's horrible. 25,000 Roma were deported, but on the other hand, 25,000 out of officially 260,000, that means 10%, but not officially around 5%. So what happened to the others? Why weren't the others not deported? I mean, were there such plans to have them all deported and so on? And the answer is rather not. So we don't have something like that. And finally, so we had until now 3 theories. And finally, and this is another problem, because all of these talk a lot about the exceptional role played by elites, in this case by Antonescu. And what happened to Antonescu after the war? He was tried, he was judged, and he was executed. Is everything fine after the war? Well, some people might say we killed, Antonescu was, transformed us into a form of scapegoat, But these deportations, I would argue, have much more to do with these deeper, transformations in the Romanian society. And instead of talking about nationalist parties, instead of talking about Rasenigeniker, instead of talking about Antonescu, I would talk, I think I tried to say that already in the beginning, about law enforcement agencies, and modernization. I would present deportation of Roma as part of a process triggered to a certain extent by modernization. And these theories and interest in elites and Antonescu obstruct, in my view, the understanding of a more complex interplay between different actors who contributed to the deportation of Roma. As you can see, when I read, everything seems to be easier. So, in my view, it's not, the deportations were neither the result of German pressure of some recent evolutions such as eugenics' influence on the Romanian government, nor can they be simply limited to Antonescu. They were the result of a long-term exclusion by local actors. Antonescu played an important role, but he was not the only one who mattered. Along with him, there were central authorities, like the Ministry of the Interior, the General Inspectorate of Gendarmerie, local civil authorities, mayors and prefects, and police, gendarmerie, police stations, but also the civilian population. So instead of talking just about Antonescu, we should talk about a very complex interplay between different actors. And moreover, we should talk about agendas, because each actor from these long series I mentioned to you had their own interest. And this is how you could eventually understand why there were such differences between, I can't show you the map anymore, between my city and the other city next to it, like 50 kilometers away, who at first sight seems to, fulfill the same conditions, but in the end it doesn't. So there are local pressures, which contribute to these deportations. Because what we have is this radicalization of actors So, law enforcement agencies and the understanding of the gypsy problem. So let's talk this way. We are talking, why? Because they are part of the government. They are not that much influenced by nationalist politics and politicians and so on. They had a long-lasting interaction with the Roma whom they criminalized over a long period of time. Moreover, in 1942, Antonescu, he ordered a special census of the so-called dangerous gypsies, and who were in charge of these, of carrying out this census? The same police, police and gendarmerie. Who were those in charge of deporting them, of rounding them up and deporting them and so on? Again, the same gendarmerie and the police. And moreover, they were influenced by these local interactions, with different actors. So, we are talking about rural gendarmerie in the countryside who perceived as a problem not all the Roma, but rather the nomadic Roma. And here I would talk about an interesting phenomenon, because I also mentioned to you that it's not only about criminalization of Roma, which is a process we can meet everywhere, but it's also, and this has a lot to do with Romania, has to do with modernization. So, coming back to Romania, in 1930 we had like 18 million Romanian citizens. In 1940 we had 20 million, out of which we are having at least 260,000 Roma, maybe double so many, 500. Now, traditionally seen, these Roma proved to be quite useful economically. They had their own crafts. I mean, okay, it might sound, even those musicians, they were making bricks, they were making spoons, they were wonderful smiths and so on. They proved throughout their history, in Romania quite useful. But something happened. In the 1920s and 1930s, their utility started to decrease more and more. Why? Because you had factories which produced better and cheaper products than they did. You couldn't, if you wanted to have some fun, you didn't really need anymore, if you had a, I don't know, pub, necessarily gypsy musicians. You could buy, I don't know, a gramophone or something. You could buy a radio. And you have these Roma organizations complaining a lot about this modernization. They don't have any more, they said, we don't have any more possibilities to work, to be breadwinners for our families and so on. It might sound funny to us now, but even the Bärenführer, so-called ursari, those who traveled with the bears, for example, and the monkeys, for example. This was in Romanian endogamous groups. They had their own, I mean, they didn't marry people outside their own group and so on. But what is interesting here, we're talking about a new attitude to animals and to the cruelty towards animals. And people in the 20th century don't accept anymore such a cruel treatment against bears, for example. Again, it might sound trivial, but that meant that these people couldn't go anymore with their bears. And they couldn't get any more these permits to work or to travel. So we are talking about modernization, which has impact or had impact on these traditional people, who otherwise had proved useful throughout most of the history in what was the Romanian space. What happens to these people? So, what does it mean, modernization? Well, peasants and the others had it better. These people couldn't adapt soon enough, and they tended to lose their economic utility. That means they got, to a greater extent, to a larger extent, impoverished compared to others. And that meant, among others, also that what was initially viable economically, this itinerant lifestyle, nomadism, didn't work anymore. So, in 1925, we had, according to the gendarmerie estimates, like 60,000 nomadic Roma. In 1942, when these people are getting deported, we have only 11,000. So something happened. I mean, 4 times, 5 times less nomads as just 15, 16, 17 years earlier. Where did these people disappear? I wouldn't say they disappeared going to Norway back then, but I would say that there was an interesting phenomenon of sedentarization. These people settled down, more or less. If in the beginning they traveled the whole year, then you had half nomadism, yeah? And then you have people buying some properties at the outskirts of some places, especially villages, yeah? In the countryside, some on the outskirts of some towns or cities, yeah? I don't want to lose you. Did I lose you? Are you still? Okay. So I will try, however, to... So, despite sedentarization, there were suggestions coming from higher-ranking officers. I mean, you should think about this in this way. So you have law enforcement agencies. Are they afraid of Roma? No. Are they? Do they suspect the Roma? Yes. Do they criminalize the Roma? Yes. What are their solutions? Yeah, you should analyze, on using a longer period of time. Are they sensitive to this racial hygiene? Rather not. They think that the problem with this criminality of the so-called Roma has more to do with social causes than with race and so on. And they say basically itinerant lifestyle is dangerous because that creates deviancy, because if you had these people settled, we could, exercise control over them, and they would knew these formerly nomads that they can't go and commit crimes and so on. So the best solution, according to some proposals coming from higher-ranking officers of the gendarmerie, the best solution would have been to settle these people down, to give them land. Yeah? The problem is, despite such optimistic ideas, nothing like that happened. On the contrary, what happened, this sedentarization of the nomads did happen, but somehow against such proposals. Because you have, and always you have to compare what some, say to what others say. In this case, you have higher-ranking officers, low-ranking officers. And now, put yourself in the shoes of some gendarmes, low-ranking officers, who is ordered to accept the presence of some formerly nomads. Are they happy about that? Rather not. Put yourself in the shoes of some, villagers who have now to leave, having as neighbors, the formerly nomads. Are they happy about that? Rather not. So, what we have is this settlement of poor criminalized people. We had feared, locals, be they gendarmerie or neighbors or villages, they feared rising crime levels and claims to welfare benefits. And nobody really loved that ideas of having the formerly nomads settling down there. We had frustration and frictions between different actors trying to get rid of the nomads. Police, gendarmerie, city halls, simple citizens. And I'm giving you an example. Porumbacul de Jos, where a few years ago I went and I interviewed a few Roma survivors. And this is a fragment from September 1934. Several nomadic tents bought a strip of land for 50,000 lei. Now it would be like 10,000 euros. The local officials put all kinds of obstacles. Thus, a representative of the church considered that by their settling down in Porumbacul, our autochthonous culture could be affected by the uncertainty of the Indian way of thinking, which would be deeply harmful. The signing of the contract, how they bought the property, was uncertain for a while, but in the end it was done. The only consolation of the village officials is the hope that one day the nomads will get bored of their stay and resume their wandering. This is in 1934. 8 years later, those people were deported. And these were the people like 10 or 12 years ago I interviewed in Porumbacul. These people were deported to Transnistria. Over there you see the oldest survivor I have ever met, he was born in 1905. When I interviewed him, he was 105 years old. He was still smoking. I don't know what kind of... his wife and 3 daughters died in Transnistria. He survived after the war. He, remarried and so on. Over there, it's Herman and Elisaveta, born in 1937 and 1940. Another child, another brother of theirs died there, and so on. Over there, his mom was shot in Transnistria. So, I'm talking, oh, sorry. Rassenhygiene, nationalism, and so on, and these juicy and very clear examples of our expectations. I mean, because they are influenced to a large extent by this way of seeing things. Whatever happened during the war must be put in connection with Nazi Germany. And Rassenhygiene, in my view, is some sort of pure evil. We learn to see it as a pure evil. But I would say that in most cases, that suffering didn't really was provoked by what we tend to idealize as pure evil. It's rather this banality of evil, yeah? When things happen in this direction, when you have this radicalization of different people, yeah, with such a horrible result like having people deported, yeah? So, rural gendarmerie, we saw that the idea was to have, some said we must have these people settled down, others said, yeah, sure, but not in our village. Maybe we should have, and what is interesting, again, this is a very common phenomenon. It happened in Germany, it happened in France, and everywhere. Nobody really would have liked to have nomads in their own village, in their own city. So the tension was there. They tempted to accept for a while their presence and then wanted to have them evicted as fast as possible. And this is what happened in the 1930s in Romania, not only in Romania. So, the gendarmerie believed by settling down the nomads, the criminality of the gypsies in rural areas will decrease. When I say gendarmerie, I'm talking actually rather about some proposals coming from higher ranking officials somewhere in Bucharest who didn't really care and weren't really affected by what happened on the ground, yeah? In practice, the gendarmerie stations and local authorities disliked the idea, yeah? That was in the countryside. Now we are talking about the cities, yeah? And in the cities, those in charge was the police, yeah? Sedentarization happened already, yeah? For a long time, on an even larger scale. But still the settled Roma, or even worse, were likely to be criminalized as a group. And we see already in the 1920s, 1930s, such very harsh and radical plans to have the Roma deported or evicted from cities, yeah? To have them sent eventually to their villages. Yeah? The idea is, gypsies don't belong to the cities. They should be taken out and sent somewhere. But this idea to have them sent somewhere is something which is radicalizing, which is common, and will have again serious consequences during the war. Yeah? And there are such plans to have them deported to a certain area of Romania as well. Yeah? But in the end, both institutions wanted the same, to get rid of their own problem gypsies by passing them to the others. Yeah? Neither those proposals of urban police of rural gendarmerie were put into practice, although they are illustrative of their growing frustration. And here we are again, we have the same map. Do you have questions so far? No? Okay. So, I guess what I wanted to say is the decreasing number of nomads didn't mean the disappearance of suspicions about Roma. On the contrary, if until then the local gendarmes were content to supervise and after a while to send the nomads away, after sedentarization started, the gendarmes had a growing problem. Yeah? Not only the gendarmes, but also the simple locals could be disgruntled. Local tensions and conflicts arose long before deportations. In some cases, even the Roma settled in a commune already for a long time could still be perceived as unwanted newcomers, with the locals demanding their eviction from a locality. And I have a few examples here. If you want, I can, for example, in 1939, several inhabitants of the village of Stolnic complained about the sedentarization of nomads within the commune. And the villagers complained to the authorities, claiming that the way of life of the nomads is, I quote, an outbreak of infection for the inhabitants of the commune. Yeah? And I showed you that with Porumbacu, and there are many other cases. So, paradoxically, both nomadism and sedentarization triggered tensions. Those who continued to be nomadic were suspected of criminality, while those settling down risked to be further suspected both by local authorities and villagers. It was a tense, explosive situation, as it became clear during the Second World War, when some local authorities and communities felt encouraged by the orders from above to call for even tougher measures, including the relocation or even deportations of Roma to Transnistria. Yeah? So, about cities. The settling process on the outskirts of cities started to be perceived as an invasion and to be attacked with various arguments. There were cases when aggravating factors could be settling along roads or railways, which were too visible or cause of shame, or further evidence of municipal and policy authorities' inability to properly handle this situation. And things seemed even more alarming if such settlements were in the capital, in Bucharest. And this is quite interesting because we are talking about an advanced process of urbanization in Romania in the 1920s and 1930s. And what happened is cities tended to expand, to incorporate the poor peripheries. And poor peripheries meant poor people, and especially poor gypsies. Now, if you have the city, which is getting bigger and bigger, what happens? You incorporate the peripheries. And the peripheries, gypsy peripheries, tend to be attacked as being too close to the civilized center, to the downtown. And in the 1930s, you have, and not only in these right far milieus, but you have that among socialists as well, authorities. You tend to have these harsher attitudes towards Roma, calls for having the Roma controlled, better controlled, or even relocated somewhere else. So from the perspective of the modernizing center, the periphery had to be sanitized and domesticated. Although the center was actually advancing towards the periphery, the discourse supported the opposite. So, in general, the different authorities complained about the fact that cities, instead of being an image success, were on the contrary a shame, both in the downtown, compromised by the presence of people seen as not belonging to the place, gypsies, beggars, vagrants, as well as the periphery. I give only one example from Iași. Iași is in Moldova, large city, university city, and so on. I quote, "Palaces and bell towers of churches, I guess, shine in the distance, but if you roll your eyes along the railway, your indignation merges with sadness. Long lines of shameful little hovels, a chaos of buildings where you feel the gargling of disease and the most repulsive dirt, lie at the entrance to a great cultural city from where so many illustrious men have risen to bring their immortal contribution. I fully felt the horror of this sight when I was accompanying in Iași 2 foreign professors, my guests eager to see the city they had heard so much about. Nobody thought of defending Iași against the gypsy huts, and hence it became quite normal to build some troglodyte neighborhoods." So, these are quite often. This is the type of discourse you can find quite often. And I repeat, it doesn't have to do necessarily with the far right. It is among socialists as well. So what you have in the 1930s is a growing frustration with the presence of the Roma, which doesn't necessarily have to be explained through rasenigene or through Roma seen as a national problem, as it happened to the Jews and others. So, Despite differences between the gendarmerie and police, in the end, both institutions wanted the same thing, to get rid of their own gypsies by sending them somewhere away. During the interwar period, neither these proposals were put into practice, although they are illustrative of the growing frustration. However, they are very much alike to what happened during the Antonescu regime. Yeah? And what we have is this interplay of different actors. Yeah? Antonescu, who gave the outline, central police authorities, local authorities, the civilians. Yeah? So Antonescu absorbed several types of arguments against Roma from different milieus. Yeah? Criminality and difficulty in exercising control over Roma. This is the police discourse. Oriental image offered both by Roma, especially in the cities where the gypsy slum served as a counterexample of what a proper Romanian city should look like. Yeah? And this is a discourse promoted especially by the mayors, press, and the various locals who sent hostile petitions asking for measures against Roma. The feeling of shame provoked by Roma in front of the foreigners, yeah, which was pre-existent, but it was aggravated during the war by the German presence. I mean, the presence of the German soldiers on the Romanian territory. For Antonescu, Roma were different from Jews. If the Jews represented a strong and influential enemy, depriving the Romanians of their elite positions, requiring their immediate elimination in large numbers, primarily from disputed regions as Bessarabia and Bukovina, and the application of comprehensive anti-Semitic legislation, because you had hundreds of thousands of Jews being deported and killed by the Romanian authorities mostly during the war. Okay, and what is the situation of Roma? They seem to Antonescu to be a relatively minor issue. It was not a question of fear, but rather of embarrassment. They were too visible, especially in emblematic areas, and they risked to compromise the Romanians in the foreigners' view. As it happened before in the 1930s, their location was an aggravating circumstance. Antonescu was particularly interested in the urban Roma. A few statements Antonescu made offer an insight into his belief that city, dirt, Roma, and lack of civilization interrelated. Yeah? Antonescu repeatedly expressed his intention to clean cities of Roma and even prioritized some of them. Yeah? And I have a few examples, because that category, I mean, of problem gypsies, yeah, is quite fluid, and we can see that based on what happened to the Roma during the war. So, in 1941, Antonescu was exclusively interested in the urban, sedentary Roma, whom he wanted evicted from the cities, and concentrated, not kill them. There weren't necessarily plans to kill them, but to have them evicted, yeah? To make some villages for them. Yeah? Criminalized as a group, they had to be made harmless by identification, control, eviction from cities, followed by sending them home to their villages of origin or to some gypsy villages Antonescu wanted to set up along Danube. Yeah? For example, the vacated places had to be sanitized and leave room for schools and other useful constructions to be built. This was in February 1941. In April 1941, he resumed the same idea of evicting the gypsies from the cities. This was in 1941, yeah? February and April. What happened then? We have June 1941, when Romanians allied with Germans, the Germans attacked the Soviet Union, and among others, the Romanians get Transnistria from their German allies. Yeah? And they start already in the fall of 1941 to deport the Jews. Yeah? The same place where hundreds of thousands of Jews were to die. Things change. Yeah? On the ground, also Antonescu's plans. If in the beginning he just wanted to take the gypsies from the cities and to set up some villages for them within Romania, now he had Transnistria. He could do something more. So his idea was now in 1942 to deport them to Transnistria, the same place where Jews had been deported. Also, changing categories within a short period. Yeah? In May 1942, Antonescu ordered the Ministry of the Interior to immediately carry out a study on how the deportation of itinerant Roma should take place. And again, in other 2 weeks, he decided to have not only the nomads, but also those sedentary Roma deported who, and this is quite interesting, because we are talking about this elusive criteria. Those gypsies, sedentary, who were convicted, yeah, had criminal records, and very important, not only those objectively seen as criminals because they had some criminal records, but also those sedentary Roma who, although they didn't have criminal records, didn't have a steady job, clear means of livelihood to make sure that they won't commit crimes in the future. So we are talking not only about objective perception, criteria to identify between dangerous gypsies, but also about very objective. So the criteria for identifying undesirable sedentary Roma were very subjective. The criminal record criterion, convicted offenders, repeat offenders, apparently is objective because in principle it would have required the authorities to take into account administrative documents, a criminal record. Do you have it or not? You have it, you are a criminal, you are going to be deported. You're not, but the broad socio-economic criterion, I quote, either they have no means of subsistence or definite occupation for them to live honestly through work, thus being a burden and a threat to the public order. This was an extremely vague criterion. Being prone to abuses. No clear means of existence could mean anything or anyone, as long as one could be identified as a gypsy. So, what I want to say is you have this police census of the so-called problem gypsies. Antonescu gives a very vague outline of who is to be identified and deported as a dangerous gypsy. And what we have, lower-ranking officers of police and gendarmerie who were called upon to establish not only who was a criminal, as I said, that's so-called objective criterion, but also who had the potential to become a criminal. So the results, we had more or less 40,000 so-called dangerous gypsies according to this very vague criteria inspired by Antonescu. But we don't have in Romania, as I said, no equivalent to Robert Ritter in Germany, no expertise, no cooperation between eugenicists and police in conducting this census. There are numerous confusions as to who was a nomadic Roma. The Romanian police was not professionalized, as to who is a Roma and so on. Not even a Roma. There were cases when even Romanians were deported as Roma, although they were Romanians, or even Turks and so on. Or sedentary Roma who were deported as nomadic Roma because they had the misfortune of traveling. It was summer, the kids were not anymore in school, and they worked as people in the agriculture with contracts and so on, 30 kilometers away from their own village, for example. They had to go, and they were seen with the cards by some gendarmes who didn't know these people, were suspicious, and they preferred to have them deported. These people didn't survive, didn't make it. So, the same question, did I lose you? Are you still, So, deportation of sedentary Roma and local initiatives. There was some freedom to make use of convenient criteria to designate their own problem gypsies. Some localities deported almost all Roma, abusing the evasive criteria of the lack of well-defined means of livelihood. Other localities, authorities, deported no Roma or very few, using, on the contrary, the restrictive criterion of proven criminal record. So what I want to say, there were many places where prior to Antonescu, there had been tensions about the Roma. I showed you that case with Porumbacu. Such gestures contributed to radicalizing the discourse against Roma. Subsequently, once the central authorities ordered the measures against the Roma, the local authorities used them as a pretext to solve their own problems. And I give you an example of Pitești, my hometown. Because of the 13,000 sedentary Roma deported, 1,000, almost 10%, came from a rather small city like Pitești. So I would mention here a few factors contributing to radicalization. The significant share of Roma in the general population. Officially, there were just 2%. Not officially, there were 10%. So there were many. Concentration of Roma in certain areas of the city, located relatively centrally, or along the railways, or close to the railway station. Do you have Rema next to the central railway station here in Oslo? Okay. And thirdly, the existence of older tensions towards the Roma. There were already in the 1930s quite many attempts of people from the city sending petitions to different authorities on different levels to have the Roma taken out of their own street, to have them evicted. But this is interesting. In the 1930s, they would have been happy to have them evicted to the outskirts, not anymore to what was already an important part of the downtown, to have them evicted to the outskirts, to the margins of the city. In 1932, irritated neighbors asked both the city hall and the Ministry of Health to relocate the Roma from the downtown to the outskirts. In the 1930s, what did the police say? What did the local authorities say? We can't take them out because they have properties. They are citizens. We can't. What happened a few years later in 1942? Well, the locals radicalized themselves because they sensed they could make use of some Antonescu's orders. And what we had, these radicalized petitions in 1942 requiring decolonization, which means the deportations of Roma and the demolition of their homes. Such solutions would have been hard to imagine just a few years earlier. So local pressures contributed to the radicalization of the local police. The same police which in the 1930s said, we can't do anything because our hands are tied, because we have to act within a constitutional framework and so on. So what happened? They deported a huge number. Officially, there were in the city only 300 Roma. They were deported, as I said, more than 1,000. And the local authorities even wanted to push further. They became even more radical than the central authorities, because the central authorities said those Roma who are conscripted into the army and fight bravely against Soviet Union and so on, their families shouldn't be deported. They should be exempted from being deported. But the local authorities were not interested in this. They were even more radical, and they wanted to deport everybody who was identified as Roma. And this is how it came to such huge differences, because they have a lot to do with these local evolutions, of local actors and protagonists. So they push for complete deportation, even of those Roma who didn't commit crimes, and anyway, most Roma who were deported by Romanian authorities hadn't committed crimes. In the case of nomads, what was, their deportation was not conditioned upon criminal records. All nomads were deported. In the case of sedentary Roma, you had, this criteria of criminal records, but as we can see, they abused that because they preferred to make use of that very unclear criteria of lacking means of livelihood. Are you a Roma? Well, I, as a gendarme, as a simple low-ranking officer, because you are Roma and you happen to live on a street which I learned to consider to be sensitive in the downtown or next to the railway station and so on, you are likely to be deported, although I, as a police officer, I cannot necessarily identify you with or connect you to a certain crime. But I might believe that you might commit a crime, or even if you don't commit a crime, I don't like you because I learned not to like you, because you are part of what I learned to be a problem in this city. Because I learned, and not only I as an officer, but neighbors as well, to consider that this is not the proper place for gypsies. I don't know if so they push for complete deportation of, okay, so I will try to make it short. This is, in the same city, a map of a gypsy neighborhood in the city. And as you can see here, there are quite many names and places and houses and, of gypsies, Dumitru Ion Tudor and his wife, and so on. And this was close to the downtown, and most houses on these streets were demolished and their inhabitants were deported to Transnistria. Yeah? And this is how this area looked like. Yeah? Their houses and so on. Yeah? This is Pitești. And then I give you an example of Râmnicu Vâlcea, which is just 50 kilometers away, where the local authorities didn't use, as in Pitești, these very vague criteria. Yeah? So here the criteria serving to identify the Roma to be deported, and I'd better quote that. Their deportation took place in September, yeah? But Râmnicu Vâlcea didn't deport sedentary Roma, unlike Pitești. And we have this report of some police in October 1942. Yeah? Some local police officers did want to deport the suspect Roma to Transnistria, yeah? But they were blocked by of a clerk, also part of the police, who thought the suspicions were insufficient and conditioned the deportation on proven convictions. I quote, "We wanted to draft documents to send them to the gypsy camp in Transnistria, but we were stopped by the police secretary of Râmnicu Vâlcea, who told us that only the justice can order this after they are tried in court." Yeah? So what happened? We had most Roma were not criminals. I tried to prove that. Most Roma were deported, however, because they were the victims of a long-term process of criminalization. And this happened and continues to happen. Yeah? Moreover, when the authorities were flooded with complaints coming from different Roma as well, from lawyers, from neighbors, other neighbors, benevolent neighbors, saying that these Roma should be sent back to their homes and so on. In the beginning, they tried to ignore that because the local and central authorities played somehow with these criteria. Yeah? What is interesting is the same local authorities which had been radicalized and pushed, to have as many Roma as possible deported, were the same which in the winter of 1942 to 1943 were asked to advise on their return. Should they get back? Should they be allowed to return to their homes or not? And of course, these authorities practically were in the position to decide if they had committed something wrong or not. And of course, they tended to say, no, we are okay, we don't want them. Yeah? So, conclusion. Both nomadism and sedentarization were likely to trigger tensions. Those becoming sedentary continued to be suspected. The long-term criminalization of the group by the police was aggravated by local specificities. Those precedents of forced relocation inspired Antonescu's plans. Yeah? In 1942, once the central authorities ordered measures against the Roma, local authorities used those orders as a pretext to solve their own problems, or what they considered to be their own problems. The risk of deportations was thus especially high, where though there was pressure both from the civilians or from other local authorities. So, okay, I still have a lot to say, but maybe I should stop here and leave place for questions and answers. And
I think that's a good idea. Thank you, Petre. Thank you for a very, very interesting lecture, and I think you are quite right that we should let the audience have the chance to ask you a few questions because this has been a very interesting lecture. Anyone? I was very fascinated by this lecture myself because I didn't know too much beforehand on the local situation in Romania. So I'm sure that we are all very much wiser now. But what I found especially interesting was the fact that it was all local Romanian initiatives.
Yeah.
and not at all a part of the German project. And I think that was very, very interesting. Compared to the Jews in the Transnistria, they were also deported to Transnistria, isn't it?
Yeah.
And what were the death rates, for instance, in the Jewish population deported to Transnistria compared to the Roma population? Can you say a few words about that?
Yeah, so I will try to make use of this map. So in the case of, I mean, we should definitely compare Jews to Roma. So there are some differences and some similarities. All Jews from Romania were victims of anti-Semitic legislation. Yeah, I mean, in the case of Roma, there was nothing like that. Yeah, those who suffered were those who were deported, but that means rather a minority. Yeah, the others, yeah, up to 250 or to 500,000 Roma. We don't know for sure the real numbers. Preserved, kept their citizenship rights. It didn't happen the same to Jews. They lost their rights. Yeah, they couldn't go to buy. They had to make forced labor and so on. All this anti-Semitic legislation didn't exist. Something similar to in the case of Roma. Yeah. Again, talking about Jews. I mentioned to you that in the view of Antonescu, the Jews were suspected and dangerous and so on, but especially dangerous were considered to be those from Bessarabia, which had been taken by the Russians in 1940, and northern Bukovina over here. Yeah, so in these cases, most Jews were killed almost immediately at the hands of the Romanian and German soldiers already in the summer of 1941 when they attacked together Soviet Union. And already in the summer we are talking about more or less 60,000 Jews being killed in these disputed areas. Yeah, I mean, these two provinces had been Romanian, most population was Romanian. There was an important share of Jewish population living in these areas, had been occupied by the Soviets, these two provinces, and the Romanians were convinced that Jews can be only traitors. So the first measure was to get rid of them as well in the first phase by killing as many as possible. We are talking about these 50, 60, 70,000 Jews, and then many of them were deported to Transnistria, already starting with the fall of 1941. Yeah? And again, we are talking about more or less 100,000 Jews being deported to Transnistria. So from these areas here where they, many of them died. Again, the Romanians occupied this already in the summer of 1941, this area. It was under Romanian administration as ally of Germany. And the capital of this governorate of Transnistria was in Odessa. And again, most Jews from Transnistria were killed as well. And there were some other Jews from northwestern Transylvania, which were under, I mean, this area was under under Hungarian administration until 1944. And what happened, Germany occupied its ally Hungary in this case in the spring of 1944. And we are talking again about around 100,000 Jews being deported to Auschwitz. So, simplifying, most Jews who were killed during the war died in Transnistria at the hands of the Romanian authorities. But I would distinguish a bit here because most Jews who were killed, I repeat, were from these areas, yeah, where the Romanians wanted to make sure that they wouldn't have Jews anymore. In the case of Roma, we have some differences. No legislation similar to the anti-Semitic. They kept their rights. And what would be interesting is they were deported from hundreds of villages and towns. Yeah, so it's not like in the case of Jews to have them only from here deported. Yeah, but their numbers tended to be rather small. Yeah, except maybe Pitești, Bucharest, Craiova, and a few others. The numbers of these Roma being deported were maybe 20 from a village, or from 20, 50, I don't know, 900, and so on. So talking about casualties, yes, we're talking about 25,000 Roma, half of them died, yeah? In the case of Jews, yeah, we're talking about hundreds of thousands, where, of course, the numbers, yeah, human casualties in the case of Jews was much higher. In the case of Jews, we're also talking about mass executions, yeah? When talking about Roma, there aren't really such mass executions. Mostly they died due to starvation, due to cold, due to diseases, typhus outbreaks, and so on. And yeah, if we are to compare, okay, it was extremely bad for Jews already in 1941, but then they started somehow to organize themselves, to identify some means to send help from Bucharest to Transnistria and so on. They were better organized than the Roma. Yeah? So yeah, somehow they could improve, although they were victims of a much stronger anti-Semitism, also of anti-Gypsyism. Somehow they could, I would say, also find better ways of resisting against their treatment, yeah, in Transnistria.
Finally, I would just ask you one small question, and that is, could you say a few words on the situation of the Roma minority in Romania today? How many are they, and how are they treated? Are the prejudices still alive in a way?
Wow.
Only a few words.
Only a few words. But the problem is I can't say it in just a few words. I mean, just as it happened in 1930, we don't know the real number of Roma. So most likely, I mean, based on self-identification during the last census, more than 10 years ago, there are around 600,000. Not officially, the number must be, of course, much higher. So we are talking about an important ethnic minority, which traditionally suffered a lot due to, if you want, long history of persecution, because Roma, until mid-mass Roma, from southern Romania and Moldova until mid-19th century were slaves, had been slaves, yeah? And that means history of slavery lasting for like 5 centuries. And of course, when you have that, you have a horrible history behind you, and you have these prejudices and biases against Roma, which have to do with a very long history. It's not easy to deconstruct them. They remained poorer. The numbers, the percentages of Roma who are not yet that well, if you want, didn't benefit from higher education and so on, are definitely higher compared to the rest of the population. So yes, we are talking about differences, and moreover, we're still talking about prejudices and bias against Roma. But on the other hand, we also talk about minority which has already better educated leaders and intellectuals, and who are better equipped, to find somehow against prejudices, and who turn into, I'm talking about these individuals, into models for the rest of the communities. Yeah, so yes, there are many, maybe not officially so many, but officially, of course, there are, and they represent maybe the second largest ethnic group. In the 1930s, they were the 8th largest group. Now we are talking about the second largest ethnic group in Romania. Yeah? And yeah, I don't know if I answered your question.
Yes, you answered quite a lot of what I was thinking about. So thank you very much. Petre, I think that I have to say a big thank you from us at the center. We are very happy that you could come here and enlighten us. Should have been a lot of more people here, but we have been streaming, so I hope that people have been seeing and listening to the lecture live, and you can see it in recording, I think.
Well, I'm sorry, because they said, let it be simple, or make it understandable, but somehow, I don't know, because on the other hand, I don't know how, I mean, I did, once I saw you here, yeah, I realized that there must be some interest, yeah, on your behalf in this topic.
Sure.
And I said to myself, why not? Let's make it complicated.
No, I think you did it brilliantly. I've been really enlightened myself, so thank you a lot, and I have to give you a little book
Thank you very much.
Remembrance as a gift from
Thank you. Much appreciated.
So thank you, Petre.
Thanks. Okay, so if you have questions, shoot.